Stephen Klineberg is a professor of sociology at Rice University, a co-director of the Kinder Institute of Urban Research. Since 1982, he and his students have been tracking the remarkable changes in the demographic patterns, economic outlooks, experiences, and beliefs of Harris County residents. Would you please join, for the first time, our Houston up-close speaker, Stephen Klineberg.
Hey. Well, thank you all very much. What an honor to be the first to open this session for you. 30 years of my life that I've got to put into 10 minutes. So as quickly as we can, let me remind us of how extraordinary have been the transformations of the city during the last 30 years. 1982, our first survey, Houston was booming. 82% of all the jobs in Houston were tied into the oil business. The price of a barrel of oil was selling for $3.20 in 1970, was selling for $32.50 in 1982. Houston's prime industrial products had increased tenfold in value. Boom town America. Did a one-time survey. 2 months later, the oil boom collapsed. The price of oil that had been at $32 fell down to $28 by the end of 1983, but Houston had been building and borrowing on the basis of $50 oil, and 100,000 jobs were lost in Houston. We said, my God, we better do this survey again. And for 30 years, my students and I have been taking a representative random sample of Harris County residents, asking people with identical questions over the years, how do you see the world? What is happening in your life? And we have watched the world change. Let me see if I can make all this work. Houston went into major recession and then recovered into a fundamentally restructured economy and a demographic revolution. Restructured economy, the source of wealth from now on will have less and less to do with natural resources, which is the basis for the wealth of Houston during all of its great booming period of the 20th century, and more to do now increasingly with human resources, with knowledge and skills. The blue-collar path to economic security has disappeared. The big employers in Houston in the 1970s was Hughes Tool Company, Cameron Iron Works, good blue-collar jobs with someone with a strong right arm and willingness to work hard. Those jobs have disappeared forever. We are in a global economy. Companies can produce goods anywhere, sell them everywhere. If you are doing a job that I can train a third world worker to do, and I pay that third world worker $10 a day to do that job, I'm not going to pay you $10 an hour. And we are watching across America, and especially clearly in Houston, a growing gap between rich and poor, predicated above all else on access to quality education. One example, in Houston, we have the greatest medical complex in the world with the Texas Medical Center, and Houston has the highest percentage of children without health insurance of any major city in America. The gap between rich and poor is the central political challenge of our time, and you can see it now being manifested in a whole bunch of different protests and recognitions that this is the critical question. How do we restore the institutions that used to ensure that all Americans could share in the prosperity of the country? And increasingly in today's world, the only way to improve the lot of the poor is to invest in their skills. Education has become the critical determinant of a person's ability to earn enough money to support a family. The other interesting thing about this new economy is, okay, the source of wealth for Houston in the 20th century had everything to do with our location in the East Texas oil fields. What will be the source of Houston's wealth in the 21st century? And the answer is biotech, with that incredible medical center, bio-nanotech, with the nanotechnology research at Rice and superconductivity at U of H, bio-nano-infotech, bio-nano-info-envirotech. The source of wealth for Houston in the 21st century will have to do with attracting the best and the brightest people in America, working at the cutting edge of knowledge, able to put that knowledge into commercial ventures. The resource of the knowledge economy is housed between the ears of the best and the brightest people in America who can live anywhere. And suddenly, quality of life issues that were never important for Houston have become central to Houston's opportunities and possibilities for economic prosperity in the knowledge economy of the 21st century. This city has no prayer of making it as a major city in the 21st century if it is perceived by people outside Houston to be not only flat and hot for much of the year, but also ugly and dangerously polluted. Forget it. And the business community knows that. You can watch a new attention to downtown development, to improving the air quality, to building bayous and building 250 miles of green space along all the bayous in Houston, turning Houston into a city that people who can live anywhere will say, I want to live in Houston. But meanwhile, at that same moment has come this fundamental transformation in the ethnic composition of the Houston, the Texas, and the American population. And that's what I really want to talk about in the few minutes I have. Between 1492, when Columbus sailed the ocean blue, and 1965, when LBJ was still alive, whew, between 1492 and 1965, 82% of all the human beings on the face of this planet who came to these shores came from Europe. Another 12% were African Americans, originally brought here as slaves to serve the Europeans. There was a handful of Chinese and Japanese working as farmers and laborers in California and Hawaii. This nation was an amalgam of European nationalities, deliberately so. We were operating in the last 40 years of that period under one of the most viciously racist laws the US Congress ever passed, the National Origins Quota Act. And it came out of this as the number of immigrants coming to the United States between the 1820s and the 2000s. 15.9 million immigrants came here between 1890 and 1914, coming from Europe, but not coming from Northern Europe. They were coming from Southern and Eastern Europe, and they weren't Protestants, they were Catholics and Jews, and they were coming to take our jobs and destroy our country. And we passed this incredible law that said, all right, from now on, you can come to this country in direct proportion to which your ethnicity was represented in the census of 1890. To give preference to Northern Europeans, it codified the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, the Gentleman's Agreement with Japan of 1906, to declare in the Act of 1924, Asians are an inferior subspecies of humanity, ineligible from ever becoming American citizens, and Asians were banned entirely from coming to America. It was a law of the land through the 20s, 30s, 40s. You can see what happened to immigration. This is the Great Depression. I tell people you really want to stop immigration, engineer a Great Depression, 28% unemployment. But basically, immigration had ended, we thought, and 98% of all the immigrants who came here between 1924 and 1965 came from Europe, 88% from Northern Europe, just as the act intended. The law could not survive the shifts of consciousness with the civil rights movements, Kennedy's assassination. In 1965, Congress changed the law, thinking we're just going to get rid of this racist law, but nothing will change because immigration is a thing of our past, and everything changed. During the 1960s, about 3.5 million immigrants came. Only 38% were from Europe. In the 1970s, about 5 million immigrants came in the 1970s. Only 11% were Europeans. In the 1980s, 10 million, 1990s, 11 million. Suddenly, America, that had been an amalgam of European nationalities, is becoming a microcosm of the world. 88% of all the new immigration that has come here since that change in the law is coming from Asia, Latin America, Africa, and the Caribbean. The United States, through all of our history, was an amalgam of European nationalities, is becoming a microcosm of the world, the first nation in history that can say, we are a free people and we come from everywhere. And it's a remarkable change happening at the same moment as the American economy is becoming fully integrated in a single global economic system, America a microcosm of the world. It is network driven, it's not happening the same rate everywhere. Two cities, Los Angeles and New York, still today contain about 1/3 of all the foreign-born residents in the United States. 1/3 of all the immigrants in America live in or around those two major immigration capitals, followed by lesser magnet cities, Miami, San Francisco, Chicago, Houston. Followed right after Houston by San Diego, Washington, D.C., Dallas, Boston, Atlanta, spreading into every city and town across America. No city has been transformed as fully, as completely, as irreversibly as Houston, Texas. It's fair to say we were basically a biracial southern city, dominated and controlled in an automatic, taken for granted way by white men. And in the last 30 years, Houston's become one of the most ethnically and culturally diverse cities in the country. Here are the census figures for each of the last six decades. Here was our biracial world. In 1960, 1.2 million people living in Harris County. 74% of us were Anglos, 20% African Americans, 6% Hispanics, less than 0.5% were Asians. During the oil boom years of the 60s and 70s, it was Anglos pouring into Houston because this is where the jobs were. And by 1980, Houston became the 4th largest city in America, still an overwhelmingly Anglo city, 63% Anglo, 20% African American, 60% Hispanic, 2% Asian. The Anglo population grew by 26% during the 1970s, and then came the oil bust. And between 1980 and 1990, the Anglo population grew by 1%. Between 1990 and 2000, the Anglo population of Harris County actually dropped by 6.3%, dropped again by 5.2% in the last decade. Meanwhile, as the Anglo population was dropping, the African American population grew by 22%, the Hispanic population by 74%, the Asian population by 76%. And by the year 2000, there were 3.4 million people in Harris County, Texas, all of us minorities. And by 2010, the census announced there are now 41% of us are Hispanics, and only 33% are Anglos. Back in 1980, Harris County was 63% Anglo. Today, it's less than 33% Anglo. That's a very big change in a very short amount of time. And I tell people, you've got to be gentle with Anglos. Not everybody's entirely happy with this. No one consulted with me before all these people came. It is a remarkable, remarkable transformation. A couple of quick things to point to here. Had Houston not been one of the great magnets for the new immigration of the last 30 years, this city would have lost population. Instead of being one of the most vibrant, rapidly growing cities in America with a tremendous entrepreneurial economy, we would have had the same fate as Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, St. Louis, Baltimore, Cleveland, Cincinnati, Buffalo, major American cities that have lost their status as major cities because they are declining in population. Instead, Houston is one of those vibrant cities in America purely because of its attraction to the new immigration pouring into the city from Asia, Latin America, Africa, and the Caribbean. No city has benefited more from immigration than Houston, Texas. And it's striking to see the anti-immigrant attitudes that are here in the city, because just imagine the discussion we would be having if there hadn't been this immigration and we were just relying on Anglo populations. Another beautiful thing I think about Houston is that we have a more even distribution among the 4 great communities of America than any of the other multi-ethnic melting pot cities. There are very few Asians in Miami, there are very few Hispanics in San Francisco, there are very few African Americans in Los Angeles. This is where the 4 communities meet in greater balance, greater equality. All of us minorities, all of us called on to build something new under the sun, a truly successful, inclusive, multi-ethnic society that will be Houston and Texas and America in the 21st century. Census announced that by 2040, they predict that the United States that the majority of Americans by 2045 will no longer trace their ancestry to Europe. This nation that throughout all of its history was an amalgam of European nationalities, by 2045 will be a microcosm of all the world's people. The American future is here in Houston now. And how we navigate this transition will have enormous significance, I think, not just for the Houston future, but for the American future. This is where the American future is going to be worked out. And it's what makes, I think, this moment in Houston's history especially profound and interesting. And then here's just you can see what's happened to our surrounding counties. Every one of them increased in Anglos between 2000 and 2010. Every one of them increased even more in non-Anglos. And so Montgomery County, that was 81% Anglo in 2000, grew and added Anglos, but is now only 71% Anglo. This demographic revolution is occurring everywhere across the board, nowhere more clearly than Harris County. And it's not just there are 2 demographic revolutions, right? It's not just the two ways of explaining this. The 2 demographic revolutions go by the names of the aging and the colorizing of America, also known as the graying and the browning. We are living longer, healthier lives in America than human beings have ever lived in the history of human life on this planet. Doctors will tell you that age 65 in 1965 is equivalent of age 74 today. You reach 65 in good health, you have a quarter of your life ahead of you. Sociologists talk about the young old. You don't get to be old until you're in your late 80s or early 90s. The fastest growing age segment of the American population are men and women over the age of 85. We chose 65 as the time you were old, and we're supposed to retire back in 1906 when 7% of Americans lived to the age of 65. We said, well, my gosh, you make it to 65. You deserve to be taken care of by the rest of us for those couple of months you had to go fishing or to sit on your porch. It's incredible expansion of age. I tell my students at Rice, you graduate from Rice at the age of 21, you have 60 years of vigorous adult life ahead of you. What are you going to do with those 60 years? And the old idea that I grew up with, the one life, one career imperative, you're going to decide what you're going to do at the age of 20, and you're going to do that nonstop full-time till you're 65 and retire with a pension. Not the 21st century. It's a remarkable new reality. But demographically, what's important to realize is that it is Anglos who are overwhelmingly, disproportionately overrepresented among the senior folk in America, because they were the ones to have been born here in the 20s and 30s and early 40s and to be moving into senior status. And we have not seen anything yet. 76 million babies were born in that incredible period after World War II when the rising tide lifted all boats. The average American man doubled his income between 1950 and 1970. And we celebrated the stay-at-home housewife mother in suburbia of the average American woman gave birth to 3.6 children. And 76 million babies were born between 1946 and 1964. Baby boom bust, preceded and followed by baby bust generation. So it's been a bulge going through the system. Demographers talk about it like a pig being swallowed by a python. Not very healthy either for the pig or the python. The leading edge of those 76 million babies turned 65 this year. And we're going to watch a literal doubling in the number of Americans over the age of 65 the next 25 years. Our politics are going to be preoccupied with Social Security and Medicare and access to Botox. You can sort of see it all coming. It is Anglos who are overwhelmingly disproportionately overrepresented among the baby boom generation because they were the ones who've been born here between 1946 and 1964. It was not until 1965 when, for the first time in American history, large numbers of non-Europeans were allowed to come to America. And you migrate when you're a young man or woman looking for new opportunities for your family, so that young people across the board are disproportionately non-Anglo, as the older folks are disproportionately Anglo. Nowhere is that clearer than Houston. Because Houston is a city of migrants. We were a city of Anglo migrants during the oil boom years, and for the last 30 years, the Anglo population has stopped growing and then declined, and all the growth of Houston has been immigration and the children of immigrants. And here is a powerful picture of Houston's present and future of all the people currently living in Harris County, age 65 and older. 69% are Anglos, 18% African Americans, 11% Hispanics, 2% Asians. At each younger age group, especially here's the baby boom, sitting right here, ages 47 to 64, the percentage of Anglos plummets. The percentage of African Americans, Asians, and above all Latinos surges. You reach the young adults, age 18 to 29. In Harris County, Texas, 45% are Hispanics, 22% African Americans, 10% Asians, fewer than 23% are Anglos. And this is a done deal. Close the borders tomorrow. Build your fence. Not another immigrant ever again is allowed to come to these shores. It's not going to make a lot of... 60-year-old Anglos are not going to be making a whole lot more babies. I tell everybody, we'll do the best we can. You can go to the bank on this. Every business in Houston is going to figure out how to capitalize on the burgeoning diversity of Houston and find it harder to grow their business as the 21st century unfolds. Every institution in Houston was built by, for, and on behalf of Anglos. Every one of them has to transform itself to be a place that nurtures and welcomes different perspectives and different experiences into this fold of the new leadership of the 21st century. No force in the world is going to stop Houston or Texas or America from becoming more Latino, more African American, more Asian, and less Anglo as the 21st century unfolds. Nothing in the world can stop that. The only question is, how do we make this work? How do we ensure this ethnic transformation can be the greatest asset that Houston could have as it positions itself in the global economy? One example, we have the second largest port in the country, the sixth largest port in the world. Just because we're 50 miles from the ocean doesn't mean we can't have a port, right? That port means that Houston's destiny is to be a world center for trade and commerce in the global economy. It's going to be an enormous advantage for Houston to have in positions of economic and political power Black Houstonians, Hispanic Houstonians, Asian Houstonians to build the bridges to the global marketplace. This ethnic transformation could be the greatest asset that Houston could have, or it could tear us apart and become a major liability, reducing rather than enhancing our competitiveness in the global economy.
All right. Thank you.
I told you I couldn't do it.
Dr. Stephen Klineberg, thank you very much.
Thank you.